The door stuck a little, it always did when the weather shifted. But I knew how to lift the handle just right. As I stepped inside, the familiar creak beneath the welcome mat should have brought me comfort. It didn't. Before I could even set my bag down, a voice pierced the living room. "What's that witch doing here? Get out of my house." Not hello, not you're back early, just that. Screamed from my own couch. Clarabelle sat there in silk pajamas, legs crossed, a glass of wine in hand like she was the queen of something. Her face twisted when she saw me, as if I'd walked in from the street with dirt on my shoes. Micah stood behind her, one hand on the wall, his eyes locked somewhere around the floor vent. Not once did he look at me. I took in the room, my books boxed, the side table I inherited from my aunt gone. My favorite armchair moved against the wall like an afterthought. I slid my purse from my shoulder and set it on the hardwood I'd polished myself just before leaving. "This isn't a kennel," I said, each word clean. "It's my house." Clarabelle scoffed, swirling her glass. I took off my coat, hung it on the hook. Not a tremble in my hand. Micah shifted like he might speak, but he didn't. The wine bottle on the coffee table wasn't mine. Neither was the gaudy floral throw tossed over the back of the sofa, or the perfume that clung to the air sweet, heavy, like rot covered in sugar. I walked past them, my boots clicking. Every sound reminded me this was my space. Behind me, Clarabelle laughed, a low, taunting thing. "She thinks she's in charge." She muttered, "She's just old." I kept walking, toward the hallway, toward my bedroom, and when I opened the door to what should have been my sanctuary, what I found made the air leave my lungs. I sat in the garden that evening. On the bench, Micah built me back, when he still remembered how to use his hands for kindness. The soil had gone dry. Leaves curled in the planters like they'd been holding their breath the whole time I was gone. 32 years. That's how long it took me to pay off this house. I was 20 when Micah's father died. 30 when I finally stopped waiting for someone to come rescue me. After that, I scrubbed other people's toilets by morning and washed hospital linens by night. Some days, my feet bled right through my shoes. But every dollar I earned built these walls. Every stitch of furniture was bought secondhand and loved until it looked new. I sanded the floors myself, painted the hallway with rollers I borrowed from the church, planted every flower in the yard by hand. The hydrangeas never did quite bloom right, but I kept them anyway. Clarabelle had moved my gardening gloves. I'd found them stuffed in a drawer next to half-empty wine bottles. The trowel I used for years was rusting behind the shed. They hadn't touched the plants once. I had told Micah before I left 3 weeks. Maybe 4, depending on how long Celine needed me. He'd nodded and said, "Don't worry, I'll check on the place." As if he understood what this house meant. As if I could trust him. Now Clarabelle was calling it hers. I'd heard her on the phone earlier laughing, telling someone how quaint the place was, how she'd finally convinced her husband to move in for a bit. Inside the kitchen, I could hear them, the clinking of glasses, her laugh sharp and hollow, Micah's voice low and tired. They were making dinner, using my pans, sitting at my table. I stayed outside until the sun dipped behind the neighbor's fence. The anger in my chest not boiling, just settling, like stone. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I went back inside, washed my hands at the sink, and dried them on a towel that no longer hung where it used to. The morning light was barely creeping in when I walked into the kitchen. Clarabelle's heels pointed. Glossy, lipstick red sat on the counter beside the fruit bowl. My fruit bowl. The same one Micah made in high school pottery. The glaze chipped, but still whole. Her shoes sat there like a joke I wasn't in on. I didn't touch them. Just made my coffee in silence, using the mug with the chip at the rim, the one Lonnie gave me our last Christmas together. I drank it black, even though the cream I'd bought before I left was already gone. When I stepped into my bedroom, my throat tightened. The bed was unmade. My white cotton sheets rumpled and smeared with foundation. The mirror was fogged with fingerprints and the dresser covered in Clarabelle's scattered makeup foundation bottles, lip gloss tubes, hairpins, an open jar of something that smelled expensive and overwhelming. The scent was everywhere. Powdery, cloying, like it had settled into the walls. Micah walked in behind me, rubbing sleep from his eyes. We just needed a place for a while. He mumbled, "Landlord issues." Clarabelle appeared in the hallway. "Barefoot? Yawning? It's empty most of the time," she said with a smirk. "What's the big deal?" I didn't answer. I bent down and picked up the towel from the floor, the one I used for my back. Another was shoved under the bed. Damp? I carried them out of the room, my spine straight, my lips closed. Clarabelle snorted as I passed. "You should be grateful anyone even visits you." I folded the towels without a word and placed them in the linen closet top shelf, where they wouldn't reach them. That night, I couldn't bear the smell of my room. I took the couch, pulling an old quilt over my knees and staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours. From behind the wall, I heard them laugh again, not the joyful kind, the kind that made you feel like a stranger in your own skin. The lights in my house stayed on long after they went to sleep. I woke before the sun, the stiffness from the couch settling into my back. The house was quiet for once. I walked into the kitchen, reaching for my mug the way I had every morning for years. But it wasn't in the cabinet. It was in the sink. Still damp, still stained with a smudge of Clarabelle's red lipstick along the rim. I picked it up carefully. The ceramic was warm from having been recently used. Lonnie gave me that mug the year before he passed white with a thin gold band at the top, a little uneven where the glaze had bubbled. He'd wrapped it in newspaper because we couldn't afford a proper box, and I'd loved it more than anything bought in a store. Seeing it, handled carelessly tossed aside like some thrift store cup, sent a quiet tremor through my hands. I washed it slowly, the water running hotter than I meant it to. I scrubbed until the red smear faded, until the glaze shone again. My breathing didn't steady until I set it gently on the towel to dry. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Micah shuffled in, phone in hand, and reached for my best pan, the heavy one I saved for Sunday breakfasts. He cracked eggs into it without looking at me, the shells dropping onto the counter. Behind him, Clarabelle opened the fridge. "Why is this thing packed with old junk?" she said, pulling out a container I'd labeled before leaving. She tossed it straight into the trash. Then another, and another. "That was mine," I said quietly. She blinked at me, then buy fresher stuff. I didn't answer. I looked at the windowsill where my basil plants sat, or used to sit. Their leaves had browned. Stems bent forward like they were bowing, asking for water they never got. Clarabelle yawned dramatically. "Your heater's trash. Lorette, fix it before we freeze to death." I dried my hands on a dishcloth, folded it, and hung it back where it belonged. I didn't raise my voice, didn't scold, didn't defend myself. I just opened a drawer, pulled out a notepad, and began making a quiet, deliberate list, one line after another, already knowing where it would lead next. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I walked to the hardware store, my coat zipped tight, my hands steady for the first time in days. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions. He handed me 5 heavy-duty padlocks and a metal file box, and I paid in cash. Back home, I moved quietly. First, I gathered what was mine: my cast-iron skillet, my Dutch oven, the baking dish Lonnie and I used every Thanksgiving. I placed them carefully into the hallway closet and turned the lock. Next was the pantry. I took the flour, the rice, the sugar, the canned beans, and every jar I'd preserved last fall, locked. The refrigerator took longer. I cleared out what I'd bought since returning the milk, the eggs, my container of chicken soup. I wiped the shelves clean. Then I attached a chain through the handles and snapped the final lock in place. When I turned around, Clarabelle was standing there barefoot in one of my old cardigans, her mouth hanging open. "What the hell is this?" she snapped. "You're insane. Who locks up a fridge?" I didn't answer. Micah came in behind her, rubbing his face like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said, "please. We're your family. You can't do this." I looked at him, really looked at him. His beard was unkempt, his eyes dull. He looked more like a teenager avoiding chores than the man I'd raised to stand on his own. "Family," I said quietly, "doesn't treat each other like squatters." Clarabelle stomped past me toward the guest room, slamming the door behind her. Micah just stood there, hands dangling uselessly at his sides. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I went into my room, opened the file box, and pulled out my house deed. Then I typed up a notice 3 days to vacate citing unauthorized occupancy. I printed it. I signed it. I placed one copy on the kitchen table and the other on the guest room door. The locks were only the beginning. Clarabelle found the notice that evening. She stormed into the kitchen holding it like it was a summons to hell. "You're seriously kicking us out. You think he'll ever speak to you again after this?" Micah stood behind her, arms crossed, silent as ever. I didn't respond. I just folded my dish towel and walked past them to the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door, leaned over the sink, and stared into the mirror. My face looked older under the harsh light lined, pale, tired. But my eyes weren't cloudy. They were sharp. They were done waiting for kindness. I dried my hands and sat on the edge of the tub. Then I pulled out my phone and called Marcia. She was over in 20 minutes. Clarabelle made a show of scoffing when Marcia walked in, but I ignored her. We went to the patio. I poured 2 cups of tea, and I told her everything. The shoes on the counter, the dead plants, the mug, the threat. Marcia didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small card, and slid it across the table. "Call him," she said. "His office helped my cousin last year. Fast, discreet." I didn't wait. I dialed. The man on the other end was calm and direct. When I told him what had happened, he didn't hesitate. "They're not tenants," he said. "They have no lease, no rights to occupy. What you did with the notice was correct, but we can make it official with a court order." After the call, I went to my bedroom, took out the navy suit I'd worn to my husband's memorial, the one that still fit, just tighter in the shoulders now. I laid it on the bed, then pulled out my deed, my tax receipts, and printed photos of the home with me in them. Dated. By morning, I'd have everything the lawyer needed. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't sleep on the couch either. I lay in my own bed, hands folded on my chest, listening to the low hum of the house I still owned. At exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to find a man in a crisp uniform holding a leather folder. He glanced at the number on the house, then at me. "Mrs. Lorette Brannock." "Yes, I'm here on behalf of the court to serve an official eviction order for Mr. Micah Brannock and Ms. Clarabelle Dunn. May I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked in with calm precision, his boots echoing on my clean floors. I knocked once on the guest room door, then opened it. Micah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. Clarabelle stood by the mirror, applying lipstick like she had somewhere glamorous to be. "You have a visitor," I said quietly. She turned, confused, until she saw the uniform. The officer held out the notice. "What is this?" she snapped. "Official eviction order signed by a judge. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises with all personal belongings." If you refuse, the sheriff's department will enforce removal. Clarabelle's face twisted. You can't do this. We're family. The officer didn't blink. You have no legal lease, no tenant rights. The homeowner has full authority. Micah looked pale. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. You had your chance to leave with dignity, I said softly. You chose otherwise. Clarabelle crumpled the paper in her hand. You think you've won. You're going to rot in this house alone. You bitter old woman, I met her glare without flinching. Better alone than disrespected. She turned to Micah. Say something. Do something. But he just stood there. Shoulders slumped. Silent as ever. The officer nodded politely and exited. I walked him to the door and thanked him. As the screen door shut behind him, the house fell into a heavy, waiting silence. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The click of the burner was the only sound as I reached for my favorite tea tin and waited for the water to boil. For 2 days, the house filled with the sounds of quiet war. Drawers opened and slammed, boxes scraped the floor, zippers, bags, plastic rustling. Clarabelle's voice rose and fell behind closed doors, full of curses and declarations that didn't land like she hoped. You'll die here alone. She spat from the hallway. I didn't turn around. I poured myself another cup of tea and opened the patio door. The air was cool, still. The basil was gone, but the wind was mine again. Micah didn't say anything as he hauled boxes to the car. I watched from the porch swing. His face was drawn, eyes heavy. I didn't feel pity. I felt distance, like I'd watched him drift for years and was only now naming it. Clarabelle's heels clicked across the hardwood one last time. I heard her shriek when she couldn't find her curling iron, then slam the bathroom door, then mutter something hateful under her breath as she passed by me. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. On the morning of the second day, I heard the front door open, then close. Silence. I waited a moment, then stood and walked back inside. They were gone. The guest room was a mess. Sheets tangled, crumbs on the windowsill, a cracked picture frame on the floor. Clarabelle's perfume still clung to the curtains like smoke after a fire. I opened all the windows. Marcia showed up 20 minutes later with a mop and a half-eaten cinnamon roll. Well? She asked, arms crossed. They're gone, I said. She didn't ask if I was okay. Just got to work beside me. We stripped the bed, dusted the baseboards, pulled the drawers all the way out and wiped them down. When we reached the curtains, I took them down myself. By sunset, the air smelled like nothing at all. That night, I ate at the kitchen table with real silverware. I lit the good candle. I folded laundry in peace. And when the wind came through the window, it didn't carry her voice anymore. It carried my own. He stood there, the last box in his arms, like it was heavier than all the others. Micah didn't speak right away. He just hovered at the doorway, the sunlight casting a thin outline around his shoulders. I stayed seated at the table, folding one of my kitchen towels. Slow and steady. We could fix this, he said quietly, almost as if he didn't believe it himself. She'll apologize. If that's what you want, just say the word. Mom. I looked up at him. He looked like the boy I remembered only in shape, not in spirit, and I was too tired to pretend anymore. There's nothing to fix. Micah, I said, you made your choice. He didn't argue, just stood there, nodding like he understood but didn't like the sound of it. Then he turned, opened the door, and walked out. No slam, no stomp, just silence and air behind him. I stayed in the chair for a moment longer, watching the empty spot he'd left behind. Marcia came by an hour later. She didn't ask anything. She brought gloves and a bucket. Clarabelle had left her final message in grease and crumbs. Old takeout cartons shoved in the back of the fridge, a pan scorched black and left on the stove. Red wine dripped along the floor by the sink. So we cleaned. We scrubbed the baseboards, washed the curtains, pulled out the fridge, and mopped behind it. Marcia muttered something under her breath when she found false lashes stuck to the backsplash. I just laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't come from joy, but from release. When we finished the counters, I turned on the radio. I didn't expect anything, just needed sound. A gospel song came through, soft and sure. I smiled. Marcia didn't say a word. She just handed me the broom and moved on to the hallway. The kitchen smelled like lemon and soap again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. And that night, when I sat on my porch, I didn't look for headlights. I just watched the stars. The call came just after sunset, an unknown number. But I answered anyway. Mom Micah's voice was quieter than I remembered. It's me. I got a job. We're in a tiny place. Not much. But it's ours. I said nothing at first. I looked out at the garden, where the basil hadn't quite come back, but something green was pushing through the soil. I know I was wrong, he said. I should have stood up. I didn't mean to let it go that far. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I'm glad you're working, I said, voice steady. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that usually means someone is trying to take the leap. Do you think you can forgive me? I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the question settle where the ache used to live. I don't know, son, I said honestly, but I do wish you well. Another pause. Then, softly, thanks, Mom. When I hung up, the tears came, not the kind that demand noise or pity. Quiet ones, gentle ones. Not for him, for me. For the woman who finally chose peace after a lifetime of waiting for someone else to offer it. I walked through the house. My house. The guest room smelled clean again. I cracked open the window and let the evening air in. The curtains swayed, soft and slow, in the kitchen. I reached for my favorite mug, the one she'd stained, the one I'd scrubbed until it felt like mine again. I brewed a small pot of coffee and poured it with care, watching the steam curl upward. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was full of the things I had kept: dignity, calm, the kind of love that doesn't beg anymore. I stepped out onto the porch and sat down with my coffee. The street was quiet. I didn't know if Micah would ever visit again, and maybe that was okay. The door to my heart would stay closed for now, but the windows were open, just enough to let peace come and go as it pleased.